Today I want to talk about the book A Long Walk to Water by Linda Sue Park. This is a historical fiction novel that's really great for anybody who's interested in reading about historical events that generally are not usually written about in American literature from what I've seen. This story takes place following two different children in southern Sudan, but in two very different time periods. The first story is with a girl named Naya, who's growing up in southern Sudan in 2008. She's part of the Nuer tribe, and she follows the same pattern every day, having to go and get water for her family over and over again. Later in the story, she ends up having to find medication for her sister who's sick, and it kind of shows light on the daily trials and tribulations of living in Sudan, even in the more modern day. The other story that we follow is a boy named Salva who is growing up in southern Sudan in 1985. He starts out in the beginning of the book as what would be a normal day. He's going to school, he's thinking about going home to his family, he's hungry, when all of a sudden he hears gunshots going off outside of his classroom, forcing him and his classmates and teachers to flee, and it thrusts him into the middle of the Sudanese civil war. He quickly becomes an orphan, having to search for any missing family members as well as trying to find safety and protection for himself. It's a coming of age story in a kind of horrible way where he's forced to take on these really important roles for himself. And along the way, he finds a lot of people who help him, but he also finds a lot of people who choose their own safety over that of a young boy, which bring up a lot of moral questions for the reader. When I read this book with my students, I really like to talk about where moral lines are and if they're different when you're in times of crisis, like these two characters are. And it's a really good book to talk about some common themes about war, as well as dealing with grief, as well as dealing with survival. And the whole story, you go back and forth between the two characters' perspectives, and you're trying to figure out how they're connected, because seemingly the two stories take place with no real connection. However, we do know that Salva is part of the Dinka tribe, which is a warring tribe with the Nuer, which is what Naya is part of. But other than that, you don't really have any connection besides that and the location. As the story progresses, you kind of are starting to try to piece together what's going on. You're not really seeing any connections, and then at the end, the whole story comes full circle. So if you're someone who really likes to read dual point of view stories, this is a really good one for you, and I really suggest you figure out how Naya and Salva are connected.